Amp Up Season 2. Welcome to the second season of Amp Up. If you have no idea what Amp Up is, you're in luck because our guest today started Amp Up last year. He's the head coach for Lady Titan Cross Country, an assistant coach for Lady Titan Track. He is the Leadership Academy Instructor, or at least one of them. He is also a Mindset Performance Mastery Certified Coach, and he's been a teacher for almost 22 years, and he has been at Papio South since it opened. Please welcome Coach H. Welcome to the podcast, Coach H.
I appreciate the opportunity to be on here with you.
I appreciate you starting it last year. We're really just running with what you started, and Amp Up Season 1 really inspired us, so we're running with the Season 2.
I'm excited to see you guys kind of take the ball and run with it, so I know this will be great, and so hopefully for those kids that are listening to this is something you'll commit to and just really take the opportunity to learn and grow from.
All right, so I think we're going to have some new listeners and people skipping straight to the new stuff. So what is Amp Up?
So Amp Up was just, my vision for it last year was knowing, having been a coach for a long time, just the mental side of sports and especially in running is so important. And we spend a lot of time physically training, but oftentimes that's not where we fall short in a race, where we're disappointed in maybe results. And it's really that mental side. So it's just an opportunity for us to be intentional about our mental training. And the idea of Amp Up, it's an acronym that just stands for Anchored Mental Performance Under Pressure, right? And I think most of us, when we think about times where we need to be mentally tough, it's when we feel pressure. It's in those times. If things are easy for us, we really don't worry about our mental toughness. So it's when we're trying to take that next step and we're getting outside of our comfort zone. So the idea was amping up the right things that you hear in your head, and hopefully we can turn down the wrong things. So
how do you think you kind of sort through all that? Because things can get clouded, especially if you're going through a lot of pain in a race or something.
Sure. I think the most important thing is we just have to go into a race with realistic expectations. I think, Kirk, even if you think about your best race ever, did it hurt? Yeah, right? Like, I think sometimes we have this idea in our head that if I do these things right and everything feels good, like it's not going to hurt. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not a reality of racing, right? So I think first off, it's just accepting what is the reality of our sport. And the reality of our sport is what we do is going to hurt. So it's how do you manage that hurt? That's really what the idea of mental training and mental toughness is really all about. You're going to experience things that are uncomfortable and painful, but can you manage your way through those? And that's what I think people who ever are able to take that big jump, that's really the level that they're able to achieve.
Okay. Do you have any examples off the top of your head? You've been a coach for a while, coaching since the beginning of this school. So I bet you've had at least one or two Lady Titans, at least.
Absolutely. The first person when you actually ask that question that comes to my mind is actually a male runner that back way back in the history of our school, during the track season, I actually coached both boys and girls distance runners. So both of them together. This was before Coach Stenger came on board. And so actually the athlete who holds our school record in the mile, Mark Nelson, he was one of the first athletes that I really saw, like, it literally was a decision that I'm going to go do this. Nothing had changed about him physically. Nothing had changed in our training. Nothing had changed in his diet or nutrition. It was literally a mental decision, and it actually happened at the state track meet his junior year. He had a really good year, but was by no means considered like a favorite. He was actually kind of on the outside to even medal. And the day before the meet, we're just kind of talking through strategy and race plan. And I said, Mark, what you playing tomorrow? And he just said, I'm going to go win it. And I was taken aback by that. I was kind of like, huh? But trying not to ever, send a message that I don't believe you can do this. I just said, well, how do you want to do that? He's like, I don't know. That's what I need you to tell me. I said, well, you're going to have to surprise people. So we just made a plan, from 600 meters out, he was going to make a move and just start pushing. And he did, and he opened up a huge lead. And his race actually made it on the news. He opened up probably a 50, 75 meter lead going into the last lap, and he got run down and caught at the line by Matt Conahan from Miller North. So he ended up as the state runner-up in the 1600. But that was one of those first moments that I just saw somebody really decide, hey, I'm going to go and do this. Somebody right now that I even think of is Diavion. That's the jump that she's made from, and I think it started for her last track season till now. It was just a decision that, hey, I'm going to take this serious and I want to be good at this. And it's not that she's a physically different person. It's mentally, she's committed to something and chasing something that matters to her, And I could probably give an example from every single year that I coached of kids. Some of them have turned into state medalists, and some of them have just made kids who maybe they just became an even better JV runner. They didn't even jump to the varsity level, but that doesn't change the mental change in them. So those are a couple examples there.
Yeah, those are great. But you talk about Diavian and Mark Nelson, and people know them as the top runners in their sport. So what would you say to someone who, obviously Mark Nelson wasn't, or both of them weren't at one point.
Right.
But what would you say to just the average runner? How do you make that decision? Because that's you're taking on a lot there.
Yeah.
Obviously.
I think the biggest thing is we have to be willing to, I think what holds a lot of kids back in this area of making the jump to being really, really good and maximizing their potential is they're trying to protect their ego. They probably haven't done something in their life where they've been bold about what they wanted to do. And when you're bold about what you want to do, there's a risk that comes with that. And so I think that risk, that fear of failure, that fear of comparison really causes us to just not commit because we don't want to look bad, right?
Okay.
But I just have never known anybody who's enjoyed their life being average at the things that they do, right? And I use that term average relative, right? Just not average in comparison to other people, but they're average. This is just who I am if I don't try. That's not an enjoyable life, right? Mm-hmm. So whether that's me as a runner, me as a student, can we get to the point that we can just commit to something, that we can say, this is what I want to do, this is why I want to do it, and now I'm going to go see if I can, right? And if we're waiting for a guarantee that says, okay, if you do this, this, and this, I guarantee you this will happen, life doesn't give us that, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's that willingness to just put our ego aside, put our ego on the line and say, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to go for. And that can be anybody, right? Mm-hmm. That can just be for the athlete who's never broken, maybe 6 minutes in a mile, mm-hmm. or, never broken 22 minutes in a 5K, you can commit and go after that, but you can't do that just being your default self, right? We got to grow, we got to learn.
Okay. In that growth, obviously compared to physical training, there's plans and workouts you can do.
Yep.
Are there any plans and workouts you can do for the mental aspect of that?
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of things that I think sometimes people scoff at, but they're really, really good. If you go back to season 1 of Amp Up, the very first thing we talk about in there is a journal, mm-hmm. And doing a what went well journal and a thankfulness journal. And people can think, well, what does this really have to do with running, right? Well, again, the purpose behind that is we're trying to rewire your thinking, right? How you are thinking now isn't going to allow you to get to the level that you want to be. So we got to rewire that, right? So it's like we got to brainwash you a little bit, but brainwash you in a way that's positive for you towards what you want to accomplish, right? We need to make you think that what I can do is believable. And so I think, something simple like a journal, you start there. That's a simple little act that you can do every single day to be intentional about your mental training, right?
Okay.
Now, that'd be like ground level. Obviously, we want to go beyond that, right? So things like being intentional about our visualization and our self-talk. Just learning coping mechanisms to help us deal with even the anxiety and the nerves that we might feel. And nerves are not a bad thing pre-race unless you don't know how to handle and manage those, right? So there's just, whether it's simple breathing techniques, visualization techniques, absolutely, there's training plans that can be put in place. But even like a runner, what works for one runner in a physical training plan may not work for another. Well, the same thing is true for mental, right? There's kind of some overarching principles that are going to apply to everybody, but sometimes it might need to be a little more individualized as well. Okay.
And for the mental training aspect of things, it sounds like a lot of this is on the runner themselves. Like, it's pretty easy to like make a workout and have the runner like go and do it, but the mental aspect just seems like more of that is on the shoulders of the runner themselves than the coach or anyone to like train them up in that aspect.
Sure, I think coaches still play a role in that, but I think if we're really honest, even about the physical training, yes, a coach can put a plan together, but I have a quote on my board right now in my classroom that says, "A teacher can open the door; it's your job to walk through it." Okay. And that's true with physical training as well, right? Like Coach Stanger or I can put together a workout, but if you don't commit to it and walk through the door of that workout, and you see this in your teammates sometimes, right? There's some people who just won't get after it in a workout and run it the way it was supposed to be run. Well, they're not going to get anything out of that. Same is true mentally, right? Yes, it is a lot on the athlete, but there is guidance and there's doors that we can open as coaches. You just kind of got to ask for it, Okay. And that's a little bit that's different there.
So the intentionality, I know you use that word a lot in describing mental performance. So kind of comparing it to the workouts, if you just do the workouts, like you do everything that's asked of you, but you kind of just like slog through it, it's kind of the same for mental training. You have to be intentional about what you do.
Yeah. And I think that the unique thing about mental training that we don't have in physical training is the reality is our physical training is really pigeonholed to a couple of hours every day after school, maybe before school, maybe on a weekend, right? But mental training, we have the opportunity to do that every single day, all day long. And especially being a student in school, there is no better training ground for being more mentally tough in those techniques than what you deal with on a day-to-day basis, right? To be a great athlete requires focus. Well, to be a great student requires focus. How many of our athletes want to be more focused in a race, but they spend 8 hours of their day unfocused in a classroom? And we can't. I like to say that training and even mental training does not live in isolation of life. I can't just go to practice and all of a sudden switch who I am, right? Who I am all day long is going to be who I am as a racer and a runner. So can I go to math class, right? If maybe you don't like math gets thrown under the bus a lot, but if you can be more mentally tough and more focused in math, you're going to be more mentally tough and focused in a race, right? It's just you're just changing how you operate and who you are. And there's a great story about Kobe Bryant about that. He just recognized like he hated geometry and couldn't stay focused in geometry class. And he just one day realized like, I can't stay focused in a basketball game either. So he made it like you brought up the word intentional, right? I love that word. He became intentional about if I can stay focused through a 45-minute geometry lesson, it's going to be easier for me to stay focused through a basketball game, which is something that he loved, right? And so I think that's the thing we have to remember about mental training is I get to work on that all day long, but I have to be intentional about it.
Okay.
Right?
So saying all day long, how do you deal with I guess getting overwhelmed and the kind of burnout that might entail?
Yeah, I think the challenge there and probably the first lesson that anybody when it comes to mental training really needs to lock in on is I think burnout comes when we're trying to live in the past or we're trying to live in the future. And we really need to be present. because the present moment is the only thing that you have control over right now, right? And the present moment isn't overwhelming. The present moment, if I can stop and think, what do I have control over right now? And if I can make the most out of that, that's going to have a positive impact on my day. But if I start to worry about all the homework that I have, or a race that's coming up, or this workout that's coming up, and I know I didn't eat a very good lunch, which is in the past, right? Mm-hmm. That's where we get overwhelmed, right? We get overwhelmed when we drag in things from the future or we drag in things from the past. That's overwhelming. That's burned out,
okay.
Right? So can I stay present? And this is a challenge for me as an adult, right? Not even an athlete. It's easy for me to think about all the things that I have coming up in my day, or think about, maybe a tough interaction I had with my wife or my kid, right? That happened yesterday, and I'm dragging that into this present moment. That's when I get overwhelmed. That's when I feel anxiety. But if I can just say, hey, I can't deal with those things right now. I have no control over those things right now, right? So what do I need to do right now? And that simplifies our life, right? It takes away that overwhelmness and that anxiety. So I think that's our challenge.
Do you have any tips or exercises to maintain that staying present mindset?
I think the first thing when I think of kids today, and not just kids today, adults can fall into this trap as well, but could you develop better toughness when it comes to disciplining yourself with your phone, right? I think so many times I just see kids who get bored, or when we are facing something that's maybe challenging in a classroom, our default setting is just to pull out that phone, and it becomes a coping mechanism, right? Is ultimately what it is. We're trying to get ourselves out of an uncomfortable situation. And I'm comfortable holding my phone, doing who knows what on it, right? And so I think if we could begin by just embracing the discomfort in small moments, and boredom is a discomfort, right? If I could just get better at embracing boredom a little bit, if I can get better at embracing a challenging thing that we're doing in a class, right? That's going to carry over to our race. Because again, it goes back to what we said, the reality of racing is it's going to hurt, it's going to be uncomfortable. Well, if I always run away from small little uncomfortable situations, and I haven't developed that coping mechanism to help me get through it, well, what am I going to do in a race, right? I'm probably going to shut down. I'm probably going to back off, because I've always trained myself that these are uncomfortable feelings and we run away from them, right? Okay. We deal with them in some other way. And I think sometimes we just have to embrace it. We gotta go into it.
I know in season 1, you gave a lot of tools and lessons to kind of help us with that mindset of just first the mindset shift, getting over to the thinking in that way.
Yep.
And then once that has been accomplished, the tools to actually use that to our advantage and with examples. So for those, I guess, listening who haven't visited season 1, I'd highly recommend it, because Coach H has, I think, bi-weekly videos of...
Yeah, the 3-week, actually. Most weeks, yeah.
Okay.
Most weeks in there.
So quite a lot of content in there. And I know a lot of that has been implemented also into the Leadership Academy, which you are a co-instructor of. So has Leadership Academy always been at the school, or did you start it, or kind of how did that happen?
So there's kind of a long history for it, and just for sake of time, we won't dive into all of it. But Leadership Academy was started maybe 13, 14, 15 years ago, somewhere in there. And it actually used to be taught by a couple of people who no longer even work in this building. And then Coach Cooley took it over along with Mr. Peñas about 9 or 10 years ago. And then when Mr. Peñas moved up into an administrator role, it opened back up and I slid over into his situation. So Coach Cooley and I have been co-teaching that now together for the past 8 years. And I would say it looks very, very different in the time that we've taken it over. We've kind of really put our stamp on it and what we wanted to accomplish through that. Than probably compared to if you would have taken it when it started, 12, 13, 14 years ago.
Okay. And then for those of the listeners who don't know what Leadership Academy is at all, what is it?
So it's an academy in this building, so you got to apply for it. And it's just basically one class period during the day. It's not like health or the zoo academy where you go off campus. So it fits into your schedule like a normal class. But really what we're focused on there is really a lot of the things that we talked about in Amp Up Season 1. It's for most athletes and most students who want to be better leaders, I think there's a lack of confidence there. I think there's just a lack of understanding of what does it mean to be a leader. And like mental training is a skill, leadership is a skill, right? Some people may be more naturally inclined towards leadership, but everybody can become a better leader. And so we get to sit down and talk about, first off, understanding ourselves, because you can't be a great leader if you can't lead yourself well, right? Being disciplined and taking care of the things that you need to, right? Then we talk a lot about connecting with other people and then how do we kind of use those relationships that get built through connection to influence and instigate some change. And that's leadership. So.
Do you think everyone can be a leader?
Yes. I don't think everybody wants to be a leader, but I truly believe everybody can lead something. Right? Your role of leadership is going to look different for everybody. But at the end of the day, the definition of leadership is influence. And everybody will have influence over somebody, right? And so I think everybody can lead. But again, I've also found in my time, not everybody wants to because they prefer to stay comfortable.
Do you think it's a similar shift in the mental performance and like running? It's a decision that you have to want to lead.
Absolutely. And just like I can tell stories about runners who I've seen a shift in, I've got stories of athletes and kids that we've worked with, and not just athletes, but kids that we've worked with in Leadership Academy, where we could see one day they made that decision, I want to be better in this area, and they've committed to it. And Coach Cooley and I have just seen them blossom as a leader. And sometimes there are people that they were the shyest, quietest, most timid person, but it's just all of a sudden something sparked for them, and it was like a fuse went off, and they just became this, like force in a good way in terms of their leadership and their influence.
And then Leadership Academy is for incoming juniors or seniors.
Yep.
And I guess if people want to apply, they have to wait till that time. And we're kind of pitching this to the podcast, but
nothing wrong with that.
You didn't start Leadership Academy, but you did start Amp Up. So why did you wait until last year to start Amp Up, and like how long was it in the works for?
So Amp Up is always something that's been in the back of my mind. It's something I've been thinking about for a long time, something that I wanted to be more intentional with, and just providing opportunities for kids to improve in those skills. And so why last year? I don't know if I have a good answer to that question. Just for whatever reason, the timing in my life was right, and I had the time and just said, hey, I'm going to do this year. And it was something my plan was to continue. But I just had some circumstances change this year, and I just didn't have the same time to invest in it that I had last year. And I've always kind of been somebody, if I can't do it at a certain level, then I don't want to commit to those things. I just think if people are going to commit to something, it needs to get their best energy, and I couldn't give my best energy to it this year.
Okay. And then finally, you've been coaching since the school opened, as mentioned earlier. So in all that experience and all the knowledge you've gained, what would be the one piece of advice that you'd give to a runner?
Be brave. And when I say be brave, that doesn't mean you got to get to the point where you're not scared. Like if I experience any sort of fear, I shouldn't act. I think bravery is when we act in spite of fear, right? That's being brave. That's being courageous. And so when I say be brave, I think every single one of these athletes that I get to work with and that Coach Stenger gets to work with, they want to be good at what they do. But for whatever reason, they're not brave enough to act on that desire, right? And so be brave, take the steps, commit, go all in. And if you fail, and I'm putting fail in quotes right now, we're on a podcast, so I know you can't see that. Like failure is part of the process, right? And if you don't fail on the process, you're not being brave.
Okay.
So to embrace that and say, I'm going to go after it in this race, and I have no idea how it's going to play out, right? It may blow up in my face, and if it does, that's fine. I'm going to learn from it, right? I know Coach Stanger and I both have the mindset. We're not going to yell at a kid for a race where they took a risk and it blew up in their face. Like, if anything, we're going to applaud that. Like, we're going to be excited about that. Now as a coach, it's our job to, okay, what did we learn from this, and what are we going to do, differently because of what we learned from this? But just be brave, like be bold and go after what you want to go after.
Okay.
So that'd be my one piece of advice.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I'm sure all the listeners also appreciate it too.
Well, again, I appreciate your time, and I'll use Kirk as an example. Kirk, you decided, hey, I'm going to do this podcast. A little scary.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? Probably a little nervousness that's involved in it, but you were brave and you took an action, right? And that's a perfect example of what we're talking about here, even with mental training. So I appreciate you being a great example of that as well.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. And now, in to dedicate this, since Amp Up was started by Coach H, we'll always close the podcast by saying, make it a great day.
Oh, I love it. Love it.
Thank you for tuning in to Amp Up Season 2. Credits go to Casey Kruger for making the amazing animated intro, Coach H, of course, for creating Season 1 and letting us to carry it on and make it our own with the Season 2. Thank you to Isaac Hazelhorse and Dakota Miser for doing a lot of behind-the-scenes work. We have the video version on YouTube, as well as a podcast version on Apple Podcasts and Spotify for if you want audio only, so you can listen whenever and wherever you want. Also, big thank you to all the guests we have. Really appreciate all of them coming out and speaking to help you guys, the athletes, and whoever else may be listening. So thank you, and stay hard.